So hi everyone. That was a bit unsynced, but let's see. My name is Matt. Today the topic is over there. Um, I'm a little bit sick, so I hope it's okay for you. I can't speak that good today, but let's see. So about JetBrains Rider. So first question would be, who's a .NET developer here? Okay, most hands are up. Rider was started like 2 or 3 years ago, and I first also want to explain to you a little bit about its architecture, because it's pretty surprising how it works. Who was ever using ReSharper before? Okay, approximately the same hands. ReSharper was an extension to Visual Studio first, right? And over time, there was a need to, because .NET Core went cross-platform, there was a need to also have a cross-platform IDE. And so what we did was to use IntelliJ as the front end. Whoever heard of IntelliJ? Okay. To use the IntelliJ front end and have ReSharper work as a background process, so it can run either on .NET on Windows or Mono on Unix systems. And in between, those two processes can communicate with each other with lightweight protocol, which is also it's funny because it's also open source and has a lot of good adjectives, because it's responsive and everything. A lightweight protocol written in Kotlin. So basically what you have with those two processes is every model that you have is in sync on both sides of these processes, and the front end is basically just like a view. And the interesting part here is also that the shared code between Rider and ReSharper is approximately like 95%. Don't stick me on that. But the missing parts are just something like settings, for instance, because those are obviously XAML and Windows Forms on Windows, and the JavaScript and TypeScript support, because that actually comes from the WebStorm engine on Rider. Another big advantage with this architecture is that IntelliJ already comes with a lot of features that we just get them over time, because with every release, IntelliJ has some kind of language agnostic features, something like Docker integration, for instance, or a very good example for me is always this MacBook with the touch bar, because we on the ReSharper side, we didn't do anything for that, but we just got it from IntelliJ. But lots of other things as well. And so this is the part where I would start with some live demoing. Now I just sit down for that. So let me see. So the first thing that is probably also more language agnostic is IntelliJ and all the derived IDEs like also CLion and PyCharm and whatever you can think of. They have a very, very big plugin ecosystem. So there are hundreds and thousands of plugins that you can install that help you, for instance, to inspect log files more fluently. So for instance, you could create that's actually configurable, but as you may see here, this represents a warning, so this line is also highlighted as a warning. Other lines are verbose, so they are just like gray. This one is information. Over here we can see another warning, and you can also, if that or this follows a certain schema, sorry, but you can also place the cursor, for instance, on this jet dispatcher and then say I want to show only lines containing the jet dispatcher. So all the other lines get collapsed, and you can very easily browse through your log files. Another thing, let's start with PowerShell. PowerShell also has a note that I'm on Mac here, and although I can't really, well now I can, but previously I couldn't run those PowerShell scripts, I still have IDE support in terms of, for instance, that I can rename a variable, and it's also renamed down here. So all those kind of small things. Also, I think this is complaining about the null comparison, because in PowerShell, null comparison should always be done from the left. So there's a warning about this as well. Also, I just recently got into that, having to do a little bit more with bash files. So in this case, also Resharper, or not Resharper, but Rider plugin can help us to fix minor issues with our code that might be not so obvious if you just start dealing with that language at first. So for instance, in this case, it's preferred to use double brackets for that. And of course, also here you can just rename certain identifiers and also navigate between them. So that should be occurrences. Oh, I forgot the shortcut. Sorry. Find. Come on. Symbol. Find usages. That was it. Yeah, and so you can also find usages with that across your scripts and whatever. Also, for instance, for Markdown files, there's a plugin that helps you with all the basics, like it validates that such a link is actually valid. So link is has a little squiggly beyond it. So instead, we can complete here, and it would complete to list, because that's the only anchor that we can jump to in this file. And on the right hand, of course, some representation, some preview. Okay, so what Resharper and Rider, sorry, I'm always saying Resharper, but what I mean is Rider, is very good at is navigating. So for instance, we have various ways to navigate here. We can, for instance, say we want to navigate to derived types and see all the derived types. In this case, it's important to also remember that from this little pop-up we have over here, we can just continue typing. So for instance, if that is a very long list, and it's pretty long if you work with syntax trees, for instance, like I do, because you have an expression and all the kinds of expressions inherit from it, then it's very important to remember you can actually search from that list, and that works basically with every result list that you can get. Excuse me. So we can go to derived types, of course, then also navigate back. Sorry, I completely missed my shortcuts. That would be base types, I think. Base type, no. Type declaration, or let's see with type hierarchy, and navigate around. We can also see what's pretty interesting. If we have this interface right here, we could say we want to see where is this property seeds coming from. That might be interesting at some point. And at this point we can say inspect this, and we can either choose to, well, incoming calls, outgoing calls is not so interesting right now, but value origin. And then we have this little tree view down there as a tool window, and we can expand it and it will do all the search for us, and then we can finally see that somewhere here for our new car that was created, we pass the 4 as a value, which then gets captured in the seeds property. There's more to this also. So everyone who's using Control Tab might be interested to check out the recent locations, recent files, excuse me, shortcut, which then opens a pop-up, but it stays open even if you leave the shortcuts. And the important thing here, in contrast to the Control Tab mode, is that even here you can, like I said, you can start typing and it reduces the result set and you can just pick from there. Something that is based on this is last added location. Well, let me see. In this case, I remember the shortcut, but I don't remember how the action was called. Recently changed files. So in this case, if we open that tab, then only the recently edited files would be shown. So especially if you're working in a big code base, and you might be able to reduce your search target, then this can be helpful as well. There's also the shortcut to which is go to recent edit location, I think. Recent edit. Let me search for edit. I should have enabled that plugin, maybe. Presentation Assistant. Let's see if it works. But it's damn it, it's not installed. So basically, I wish I would have the plugin installed. But what I can tell you is the plugin would show you the shortcuts, which I actually type. But what's even more important is to remember that this little dialog right here, the execute actions dialog, is searchable. So for instance, and I unfortunately forgot the name of this as well, recent locations, recent edits, recently changed files, this one right here. And even if you don't remember the shortcut, if you know what the action is doing just approximately, and you can describe it, then you might find it here as well, and also see the shortcut for that. Okay, what we also previously added was recent locations, which is unfortunately not working. Okay, that's the joy of showing new features. Okay, let's skip that. Recent locations is basically a little bit like this, but you also have the code snippet where you have been active as a little preview. So it gives you a bit more context. Okay, let's continue with something more assistant. And I really like this example here, but let me just NET standard. This hopefully works. Has missing packages. That's also the joy of having a preview of .NET Core installed. Anyone has heard about postfix completion already, or postfix templates? None of you. Okay. So I want to start with this example, and it's just a factory method. Create car, and you've seen the car type already with two constructor parameters. And the normal way would be something like return, new car, and then we fill in seats and maximum velocity, right? Yes, that's also possible. But with postfix templates, you can do it more in terms of Yoda speak, so to say. So like Yoda from Star Wars speaks. In this case, but it's also interesting that it matches the declaration of the method. So we want to create a car. Okay, so write car. Afterwards, we can say we want to create a new one. So we type .new, and we'll put the new at the beginning of the type. Then we can fill in the parameters. maximum velocity. Now we're at the end and we want to return that, and we just hit dot return, and we'll put the return statement at the front, or completed to return statement. One example where this can get really crazy will be in this next example. Get big vehicles. So we have this collection right here, and we could say, okay, vehicles, I want to iterate over that. So we do a for each. Now we want to check for a certain seat size, and since it's big, we could say vehicle seats, and let's let the seats be greater than 10, and only if that matches, then we can return the vehicle and we will yield it, right? And at the end we can just complete it to a link statement. That exists for many of the C# constructs, like also for throw, and there's actually a bunch of this bunch of items over here which you can find in the settings, and it's also adapted to all the new language features. Okay, so something more for assistant maybe. Language injections, right? So sometimes we have a string, and inside that string there might be some regular expression or HTML, and we can either define this with a comment in front of it, or if we don't have a comment, then we can just say Alt Enter, and we say mark this as an injected language. In this case, I think it's saved in the .settings files, which belongs to the project. And we could say this was HTML, right? And again, from here we can search for that, and it's marked as HTML. Something that a lot of people like to see is the local history. I sometimes forget to show it, but local history. This is basically something like, imagine you're working on a certain bug, and you started in the morning, and later that day you realize, okay, I tried different approaches, but that one thing that I had at lunchtime, maybe that was almost it, so I want to go back in time and have that. And a good workaround would be just to commit all the time if you're deleting something, or using undo, of course, if you haven't messed up your undo stack. But in this case, what happens is that at every certain point in time, the content of that file is captured, and you can go back and just revert it to that moment. And especially important is if we, let's say we revert it to here, then another stack item is created, so you don't delete that whole stack until then, but you create a new item. And also, if you want to have a definite point in your local history, then you can just put a label and you say that was the first approach or something, and that will be shown local history, show history. That would be shown as a tag right here as well. Okay, so I will maybe open another solution meanwhile. Testing, I promised some testing. In this case, there's just a bunch of unit tests, and what I want to show you is something around debugging and breakpoints. So this test ultimately calls this function right here, and we will just place a breakpoint into that. Or first, as a little bit of explanation, we have some local functions. One function is returning just an array, a group of people. The second will filter that that collection, and will just return those with length smaller or equal to 4. And the other function will call a print method onto all of those items. So we will set a breakpoint right here to the print local method. And now if we can debug that. And let's say I'm interested, just as an example, I'm interested in this method, but only when it gets called with Chris, for instance. Chris is here in the second call for the print people method. So I would need to go ahead and step through the execution of my code, right? Something that works much better are dependent breakpoints. And so in this case, I would put a breakpoint right here. Well, what we can also do is, of course, say something like s1 and string, and we would just say it should be Chris. That would work too, but it's not always possible if we don't deal with strings, for instance. If it's more about the structure of our code, then we could go ahead and say, okay, this, let's remove the condition again. We could say this breakpoint should only be enabled when another breakpoint is hit. So make it a dependent breakpoint onto some other. So in this case, we would just use the other one. So it's not really great to see, but here on the side you see that this whole statement is selected. Hit OK, and we would also say, because we don't want to stop right here, we make it non-suspending. And now in this case, if I just continue with debugging, we see that Chris was passed to that method, and we didn't have to go a lot through the execution stack and back and forth and so on. Okay, so more about debugging. If this was that actually works better on a real PC if you don't have this trackpad, but I can maybe zoom it a little. If you have concurrent running execution stack, so parallel execution, then you can see in the parallel stacks window all the different threads and where they are currently, including their stack traces. Okay, unzoom. We can also search for, let's see, takes a while maybe. There. We can also search for all the instances of a certain type. So for string, we can see that's quite a lot. But even if I, let's see, collecting data and show more, and I think, right, we can even find here our Chris entity or instance, and I'm not sure if that uses the debugger display attribute, but at least the toString method, I guess. So if you have some kind of, I don't know, memory leaks or something, that would be one of the possibilities to start investigation. Okay, something more. Well, maybe this one is a good example. What we've also recently introduced is the IL viewer, especially on Mac. I think in ReSharper there was one already, but not in Rider. And so you can see how certain things compile down into IL code, the intermediate code that is contained in the .NET assemblies, which is especially interesting, actually, with new language features. So let's see. I will just quickly open another window. Anyone has worked with C# 8 features already? None of you? 15 minutes, okay. So of course we're also interested in bringing support for all the new language features, and this is one of them. Previously, if you want to grab the last item, we would need to do something like args length and then -1. Anyone has an idea what this is how this is written now, or can be written now? Well, you actually don't need to, because all you need to do is have Rider and start. But you can use an index from end expression actually here, and then you have just this little, I have no idea how this is called, hat symbol, and 1, which defines the last element actually. I mean, hat 1 is actually the last element. And now let's see if we can also see here. I first need to build. And that's always a very nice way of checking how new language features are implemented, because in this case you get a bunch of code automatically generated, right? Because the runtime itself didn't change, but the compiler did change. At least in this example, I think. So let's go back to some bigger project. Rider also includes support for all the major version control systems. So VCS, SVN, Perforce, many others too, and is also very performant with those. This project is not big in particular, but if we search for something like help, we can see that this works pretty quickly, and it's not very different with bigger projects like the Rider and Resharper project, for instance. It works similarly fast because many of the VCS repository information are cached already in advance. Especially here, what I tend to forget, especially in those cases when it's important, is sometimes you want to reduce the result set to a certain set of files that have been modified. So in this case, you can select, okay, I want to see only the commits that belong to this folder right here, right? And now I can just remove the search term, and would only give me those commits that did something in that folder. Also, if you choose to, let's use all here again. If you choose to search for certain persons that have been committed, you have auto-completion right here as well, and afterwards you can just command and enter, and it will apply those results. Let's remove that again. What's also pretty neat, and what I use all the time actually, is if we choose to interactively rebase from a certain point, we can just modify those as we want. So for instance, we can mark them as fix up, or what else is there, or skip, for instance. We can rearrange them just by drag and drop. And we can also choose to edit. In this case, rebase would continue, but at a certain point you get the opportunity to go back into your IDE, make the changes, and then continue rebasing. It will include those changes that you've applied. Okay, very important to cancel right now. Discard. Yeah. Okay. Moreover, what I like really much is if you're in a certain file, and let's say you're in the commit dialog and you realize, okay, I have those unused usings here. Don't go back to your, or don't leave the commit dialog. you can just apply changes from right here, and you can say remove unused directives and file, and you can even choose to do this throughout the solution, just from inside the commit dialog. And of course, on the right hand side, you can also see all those highlightings which would say, okay, here a certain symbol could not be resolved. So especially the right hand side of the div viewer is basically just how you would see it in the IDE. Very important also to remember here is if you use the unified viewer, then I think you lose the opportunity at least to apply quick fixes. You still have those marks on the right hand side, but you lose some of that stuff. Okay, let's revert that. Okay, anyone's using Windows Forms? One person. So then I will just mention it in one of the 2019.1 release will have support for Windows Forms, at least on Windows systems, and you can have at least the designer inside Rider, and just design your forms from over there. What we've also added is the opportunity to run coverage for your tests. And it was visible already, unfortunately, so the effect is a little bit smaller. But here on the right hand side you have either gray markers for code that hasn't been executed within your tests, or green which is only covered by passing tests, of course. And if it was red, then of course there's an exception or something. Okay, let me see. Is anyone following cyclomatic complexity, the metric? Yeah, so here I have something, and I'm showing you this because I actually just wrote the plugin for that. Let's see. This is not cyclomatic complexity, but it's a different one. And let's see, for each a bunch of times. And I would just nest it a few times. And I don't actually need to fix the code because it's doing alright already. And method K. And in this case, I won't nest it. But I have the same amount of for eaches, right? Cyclomatic complexity would have the same metric value in this case. Cognitive complexity was, I think, proposed by Source. Anyone has heard about Source? I think it's a Swiss company. But they proposed this other metric, which is called cognitive complexity. And of course, it's obvious that this piece of code is much easier to understand, so we get the simple enough indicator over there. Whereas, let's scroll up. Whereas this, where everything is nested, well, and of course, just assume we have some more logic inside that, is very complex to read, right? Okay. Something more. Let me see. Formatting. Yeah, right. Sometimes it's useful to format classes. How much time? 5 minutes, including QA. Okay. Sometimes it's useful to align properties not like that, but more in columns. That you can do also from the settings dialog, and let's search for column, and it should be somewhere here, tabs and alignment, and okay, I know where it is roughly. properties and events. This setting could be enabled, but we can. This would format all of our classes and all files according to this. Sometimes it's also useful to just do this as a comment. And now if I let's see, cleanup. Maybe it's cleanup. Actually, it should work even without that. Okay, this takes a little bit long. Sorry. I should say this set this to true. And now if I reformat this, this just aligns in columns. Especially interesting, I think, with big DTOs, or even in Unity or something. This is quite helpful. What ReSharper and Rider are also very famous for is that how you can deal with legacy code. So for instance, and maybe clean up your code base a little. But actually first I want to concentrate on this example. So we have this little call here. What are we doing? And the method describes it quite well already, because we are passing true and 1 as a parameter. And this is not really helpful. We don't actually know what does those values actually mean. And recently we hint settings, let's see, parameter hints. We introduce parameter hints, and this will just show the name right inside the method call. Of course, in C# you can also choose to define to have the argument name also be there. But this is a nice workaround. In this case, so at first glance, this might look like do always is executed conditionally also, but we have this little inspection right here. In some cases, it might be worth to consider making this an error, because it's like, well, it's not really obvious, right? And we can just choose to fix that quickly. Here's another incident of this, and we can also say, let's show this as an error, because again, this might look like do always is executed conditionally. And also here we can fix indentation. Also in this file we have a bunch of other classes that don't really belong to each other, or maybe belong to each other, but it's, I think, kind of a convention to have a single type in a single file. And here's what ReSharper can do, or Rider. And that is move the types into matching files. And so we can just go ahead and everything is refactored, and this didn't work. Wow. Well, I guess after you restart the IDE it would work. But it might also be because you see I have this messed up environment with .NET Core 3 preview. So usually that should work. Let's try it again. No. Okay. Recent locations, but that's actually looks like from some other place. Anyway. Rider and all the other IntelliJ based platforms also have the feature of scratch files. So in this case we can have HTTP requests, for instance, and we could just let's say get the files from Google. And what's interesting about that also is if you run, well, that supports many other keywords as well, like accepted content type and so on. But in this case, it's pretty interesting that you can also compare two different responses. So in case of Google, we could check where are the magic strings, how we are identified maybe, and what has changed over to consecutive requests. Okay, so that was it, and that is now it's time for questions.